Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Ellen. My pronouns are she, they. I'm the co-executive director of the Hollywood Fringe Festival. I'm so excited to be with you all tonight, to talk with you all tonight, and to have some amazing panelists that are going to be facilitating an amazing conversation. Before we get started, I want to do a video recording consent. This is being live streamed to Facebook or to YouTube. So sorry for my mistake there. So if you do not want to be seen in that video frame, you can just make sure that you do not use your camera tonight and you will not be showing up in that space. Primarily, the people that are showing up in that are going to be the people who are speaking, but it's just a warning so that you have that it's being recorded. I also want to have a land acknowledgement. The Hollywood Fringe acknowledges that we're on the unceded lands of the Tongva, Quiche, Gabrielinos peoples. Our statement serves as a practice as we commit to furthering our connection to Indigenous communities, past, present, and emerging. You can learn more about our land acknowledgement, why we do it, and about the land that we're on at hollywoodfringe.org/land. This is a new program and one that we've been piloting out for the next 2 years. I'll be dropping a form in the chat at the end for anonymous or not so anonymous feedback. We also typically have time for questions along the way, but otherwise, so let's throw them in the chat when we have those bubbling up, and we'll address them with the panelists if they're relevant. And if not, we have an amazing staff member, Sina Peterson, is going to be in the chat being able to be alongside you, answer your questions, and make sure that we can keep going along here. Why are we here? Centering anti-racism practices through an understanding of our individual and collective personal stake in ending white supremacy. And we're trying to create truly radically accessible and inclusive spaces in Los Angeles theater and beyond. What is going to happen? We're going to introduce you all to some terms. We're going to have a moderated conversation, a little bit of a writing prompt. So if you have a notebook near you, as well as some pens, it's so helpful. And then we're going to also have a formal panel discussion for the last 40 minutes, and then we're going to have a facilitated Q&A right there. Before I get started, I do want to start sharing my screen and go through a little thing. And then, actually, no, I'm reordering myself. Amazing panelists, could we introduce you before we get into sharing screen so that I can see your wonderful faces? And I'm going to call out Emma first to share screen. If you could say your name, your pronouns, a visual description, which I didn't do, so I'm going to do that before I introduce yourself. A visual description is for our friends that are unable to see ourselves, whether that's because of visual impairment or other reasons. I am a white woman. I'm wearing a striped red shirt. I have brown hair, and I'm in front of a black wall or a white wall. It is a white wall. And like I said, my name is Ellen, and my pronouns are she, they. So again, Emma, if you could kick it off by introducing yourself and also a little bit of information about your experience with Fringe.
Yeah, I'm Emma Irene. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with almost shoulder length brown hair, and I'm wearing a green sweatshirt with a naked lady on it. And I have a white background and occasionally a dog in my lap because he's very anxious. This is Dennis. He's a small black doggy, and his pronouns are he, him. And my involvement with Fringe, I wrote and produced and performed a solo show in 2023 called The Faults in My Stars. And then I did another solo show in 2024 called Astro Cabaret. And to clarify, Ellen, did you also want anti-racist organizing in this part? Yes, okay. I've also been involved. I was a part of this panel last year as well. Ellen and I actually met before I was involved in Hollywood Fringe through White People for Black Lives, which is a anti-racist organization for white folks to bring racism into their lives and become accomplices in the fight against racism and for collective liberation. So I got involved with them in 2020. I'm originally from Minneapolis, and I moved about 6 months before George Floyd was murdered. And that experience, being so far away from the community I'd been a part of for a decade and amidst a pandemic, was very much an eye-opening moment for me. And I realized I needed to start fostering community for myself in my new home. And it also really opened my eyes to the city that I had called home for so long. And I continued to be involved with White People for Black Lives, doing some of their accountability teams projects, their alternatives to policing projects, some of their study and action programs, and some phone banking as well. And now my work has been more through the art that I make, I try and make sure that that is as accessible and anti-racist as possible. And then also my job, I'm involved with wellness program management, and I want to make sure that I'm not bringing in any folks who are part of the pipeline to make America healthy again or any of that nonsense. And it's truly about collective experiences and connection and not about self-improvement above all else. So that is me. I can popcorn it over to Rachel.
I'm going to unmute myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, she, her pronouns. I have blonde hair. I'm wearing a green shawl. I'm in a room, and behind me is a Himalayan salt lamp and a picture of a bird. I, yeah, I wrote, produced, and self-directed solo show called Baby last year, 2024 Fringe Fest, and I had a wonderful, awesome experience. My work around anti-racism began it sort of started in 2016 in my grad school program. I'm also a psychotherapist in addition to being a performer, but started more advocacy work with White People for Black Lives in 2017 and 2018, doing phone banking and door knocking, and then some more activism work around getting Jackie Lacey out of the district attorney's office because of some of her harmful practices. And I'd say now, currently, my anti-racism work is very much woven into my practice as a psychotherapist, with the understanding that white supremacy culture is harmful and impacts everyone. So a lot of the problems that I see in individuals and families and couples or children are rooted in white supremacy culture. So I think that's about it for me. I guess I'll pop it over to Michaela.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela Buckley, she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with long, dark brown hair. I have a white background with a black and white poster behind me and then some office-y supplies. My experience with Fringe is I did a Fringe show a really long time ago and did not necessarily have a great time, but since Ellen has taken the leadership with the co-directors and the new leadership of Fringe, I've been brought back with optimism and hope for what Fringe brings to our community. And as far as LA theater, I'm a theater producer and community organizer within the theater community. And as far as anti-racism goes, I grew up with really conservative Texas Southern racist family members and grew up in a very not white neighborhood. I grew up in San Diego, so I was surrounded by a lot of diversity, and that helped me at a very young age question the things that were being said about BIPOC people because I was in community with BIPOC people. And that continued through college as I went to a predominantly Hispanic university, and so I was just constantly questioning these things that were being said. And then brought that into my work through just a lot of EDIA of what does it mean to be an independent theater artist. Specifically, when I was working at LA Stage Alliance and the Ovation Awards, we were really trying to get to the root of how to have a more diverse Ovation voter pool, which then led down the rabbit hole of what does it mean to be a theater professional? Who are the people that tend to be theater professionals? And who are the people that tend to get degrees in theater? And why is that mostly white people? And what does it mean to have white privilege specifically as a theater artist? And that turned into a group of us started doing the LA anti-racist theater standards. When We See White American Theater came out, we adopted those and made them specific to LA theater as much as possible. And that has continued into the new service organization, Theater Commons Los Angeles, which I'm working with to say, how do we incorporate anti-racism into the next chapter of Los Angeles theater? So, yeah. And I will pass it to Spencer.
Hey y'all, I'm Spencer, a white man, black hair, turtle glasses. I had to figure out what they were. Black shirt. I've got a blue screen behind me. For me, Fringe, I don't even know where to start on this. I started in 2017 doing shows. Yeah, and then this year I'm just gonna plug my own show this year. Blow the Man Down, a sea shanty quote unquote musical. I'm also running tech at Fury, one of the venues this year, and I'm also one of the founding members of the Access Advisory Board. So we've been working on that for several years, and this anti-racism training is something that we also kind of rotate into what we discussed there. In terms of anti-racist training, during pandemic, I did Nicole M. Brewer's anti-racist training, 2-week course. Highly recommend it. It's fantastic. And when I thought I knew a lot, I realized I didn't know as much as I thought, and I learned a lot more that way, which has helped me kind of, as the years have progressed, really incorporate that into my everyday life and experience. And one of the big things for me in terms of anti-racism practice is when it comes to casting for shows, for films, things like that. And I can go on and on about that. So we can maybe save that in the discussion area. But I've noticed that I have had a lot of success with discovering underrepresented voices in terms of casting and being able to at first actively incorporate them, but then now it feels like I'm just getting the best people for the roles, and it isn't necessarily because I'm actively seeking out certain individuals, but it's just they are the best, and that's what's great about it. And so we could talk. I have a lot of casting recommendations, y'all, for y'all too, if you want to know how to access different casting recommendations and things like that. So ask me later, ask me, find me, whatever we're doing with all that. Anyway, that's me. Okay, I'll popcorn it over to, I guess, back to Ellen.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Spencer. I'm going to screen share really quick, and we're going to make sure that this works right. So I'm going to go to present. Nope, wrong presenter view. Just one second. See, this is why. We're going to try it one more time. We're going to present in full screen view. Can everybody see my screen? Is it full screen for everybody? Amazing. Okay, we're going to go through these slides now, and then after that, we'll back into our facilitated conversation space. Some common questions that we'll address in the coming conversation, and one that I'm going to address right at the top, is why are we centering white folks in this conversation? For us, when we made our Access Advisory Board that Spencer mentioned in 2020, in April 2020, we had our first meeting, although we had been talking a little bit before then. And one of the main things that we were talking about was the work that white people can be doing to help our community be better, specifically in helping make sure that we have a safer space for people to take braver risks within their work and for people to be able to stop facing the microaggressions that they face on a daily basis. Some other things we'll talk about during this is going to kind of address through our panelists is going to be what is white supremacy and what is anti-racism, kind of breaking it down really simply there. What is my role as a white person in ending white supremacy? And what does this have to do with theater? And I promise you that throughout this, those will start to become a little bit more illuminated for you. Before I hand it over to our amazing panelists to facilitate the next part, I want to reiterate that our code of conduct applies in all Hollywood Fringe spaces. I'm going to read our community ethos just to center us in Hollywood Fringe's community and what we stand for. And then if you want to read the full code of conduct in full and share it with your cast, please do so. It's available at hollywoodfringe.org/conduct. The Hollywood Fringe is committed to creating an inclusive environment and supportive participants from a multitude of backgrounds, especially those who have been historically underrepresented based on race, ethnicity, disability, DDEF, age, socioeconomic status, physical appearance, body type, sexual orientation, gender identity, citizenship status, or religion. Our festival is built on a freedom of expression and lack of censorship, which means we must maintain the utmost respect for one another to create a safe space for people to take risks in that work. We do not censor your words unless they're actively harmful or hateful towards a protected group, for example, women, people of color, queer and trans folks, disabled folks, deaf folks, fat folks, religious folks, and more. There are limits to this uncensored nature, which are often set up by our Access Advisory Board, which is our artist advisory space, and enforced by a committee made up of Hollywood Fringe staff and board of directors. We're a very diverse community, one that often has more women and non-binary people producing than men, and we attempt to foster a community where they don't face the same gender discrimination that they face in a typical working environment. We're on a path to making the Hollywood Fringe a more accessible space. This sometimes means that we might use words like disability-related terms that you might not be familiar with, or an interpreter might block your view of the panelist. We encourage you to use that as a learning opportunity. Google those terms and appreciate the fact that you get to not face that same issue of not being able to see on a regular basis as we often do. We are a very diverse community that is committed to anti-racism, not only through our words, but through our actions. So sorry. Let me rephrase that. We're a space that is committed to anti-racism, not only through our words, but through our actions. In many environments, people face microaggressions and racism daily. At Hollywood Fringe, we actively work to keep these behaviors out of our spaces. We try to engage folks in conflict resolution whenever possible, when people break this ethos, but this ethos is incredibly important to us. We fiercely protect it and reserve the right for anybody to ask anybody to leave or take a break at any time from any of our spaces. This is a promise to those in this room that face these issues in this community and outside of this community that we're actively working with you to make sure that these issues are handled. And we strive to have a wholly inclusive environment and invite you, our audience members, to join us along in that journey. And now I'm going to pass it over to Rachel and Spencer all right, we're going to record this, to go through our community guidelines.
Yeah, y'all. So just a couple of community agreements. We're going to kind of read these as they are. Feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have any. Be curious, open, and respectful. Let's call in members, not out. No one knows everything, so together we know a lot. Let people finish their thoughts completely before moving on to the next topic. And of course, use I statements. Can you help me understand? I don't understand. Steer clear of I feel. So keep it more in the present and less in the feelings.
Great. Listen and share space. It is just as important for us to hear out our fellow community members as it is for us to speak up, be seen. We speak in draft in these rooms, so meaning we are vulnerable and can ask questions about things we don't know about. This is a learning space. Speak from your own experience, not the I have friend mindset. So keeping it in your own experience.
Yes, and everything said here is to be presented as a learning and reflection opportunity. You do not have to be perfect here. And if we want to share information or resources outside the space, let's ask permission from the speaker before doing so. And of course, when in doubt of yourself, feel free to reach out to a staff member via DM or direct message. And I guess for those that are not aware of how to do that, if you go to the chat, it says like to all the group, and then you can also select an individual. So you could send it to Stina or Ellen as well.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to pass it over to two friends in a second, and we're going to go over some things, including the LA anti-racist theater standards and the characteristics of white supremacy. I'm going to pass it over to Michaela first. I'm going to talk about.
Yes. So these are definitions from the Los Angeles Anti-Racist Theater Standards website. We do have a whole list of standards. These were written, like I mentioned, as a response to the We See White American Theater and how to bring that into more specific action for LA. And part of that was creating definitions so that everyone was on the same page when we were talking about these standards. So these are an excerpt from those standards. AAPI. AAPI is an acronym for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, sometimes used interchangeably with APA, Asian Pacific Americans, or API, Asian Pacific Islanders. Anti-racism. Anti-racism, to put it simply, is the active and ongoing practice of recognizing and combating racism, whether on an individual, institution, or systemic level. It must be active, as it isn't enough to not be racist. We must be proactive and intentional in our dismantling of the racial inequities all around us. It must be ongoing, because anti-racism is not a permanent identity, but rooted in what we are doing or not doing, supporting, or expressing in each moment. BIPOC, or BIPOC, is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, which gained popularity in 2020 as a way to center the unique experiences of Black and Indigenous erasure within Americans' history. While language is constantly evolving and there is no one term that everyone agrees on, for example, some prefer BIPOC, some prefer POC, some prefer people of the global majority, etc. EDI. EDI is an acronym for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. You may see it elsewhere as EDIA, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, IDEA, same words, different order, or IDIB, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Identity conscious casting as opposed to colorblind or color conscious casting. Identity conscious casting, to quote casting director Victor Vasquez, is about making space and embracing how actors and artists can bring their whole identities or even part of their identities to a process, to a character. We are not saying casting is blind to those parts, but we are also not saying it's only color that we're conscious about. We can also be conscious about somebody's rejection of gender as a construct, somebody's queerness, somebody's abilities, whether neurologically or physical. That's what identity conscious means to me. That way we are inviting and welcoming, that we are actively and radically making space for all of the different ways that actors exist in this world. And then within those standards, there's a hyperlink to a HowlRound article. Harm, the suffering, loss, pain, and impact that can occur both in conflict and in the instance of abuse, as well as misunderstandings steeped in the differences of life experience, opinion, or needs. Marginalized community. A marginalized community, sometimes referred to as an underrepresented, historically excluded, and/or frontline community, is a group of people who are denied equitable political, economic, cultural, or social access due to their identities. This marginalization could be based on race/ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, physical/mental disability, body size, age, language, or economic status, immigration status, religion, system impacted status, or a number of other factors. Producer. Los Angeles has a unique theater ecosystem, one in which many of our theater producers are not producers, in quotes, in the typical sense of the word. LA has a strong history of artist-driven models or other alternative creation techniques. At the end of the day, somebody or a team of people selects the project and is ultimately responsible for the success and well-being of the project and the artist. Anywhere in this document we refer to as the project's producers, that's who we mean. PWI is an acronym for predominantly white institution. SWANA, SWANA, is an acronym for Southwest Asia, North Africa, to be used in place of Middle Eastern, which is a colonial Eurocentric origin. White supremacy. While often associated with extremism and hate groups, the term white supremacy also refers to a culture of beliefs, values, and norms, and standards that perpetuate social, political, historical, and industrial white dominance, or white as the default. These insidious characteristics of white supremacy culture are often adopted by the organizations as norms or standards without ever being actively named or chosen. These include perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, worship of the written word, paternalism, either-or thinking, and objectivity, to name a few. While this document largely addresses these harms, it is critical to acknowledge that the instances of violence, harassment, threatening behavior, hypersexualization, fetishization, and the use of racial slurs still exist within theatrical institutions.
I also, Michaela, would love if you could also introduce the anti-racist theater standards and what they are, just like a brief sentence, and then we're going to drop them into the chat because it's something that we're going to reference a lot throughout this chat.
Yes. So the anti-racist theater standards, which we all dropped in the chat at the same time, is what we have always called it a living document. This was a moment of time where, and we also call it an aspirational document. So the goal was to have theater companies sign on to the standards to say, we are going to do our best to uphold these. And it comes with a lot of practical advice. The other goal is that artists would read the standards, say, hey, these are the standards of anti-racism within our community, and these are what in the world I deserve to be treated with. Again, there's practical things such as making sure that there's pantyhose that match the skin tone of your artist, microphone packs that match the skin tone of your artist, that if you're going to and hair care for different textures of hair. So, and of course, other practices as well. For some reason, those were the three that always caught people because people were like, but that's expensive. And we're like, but you already bought white mic packs. So why didn't you also buy tan and brown white packs? mic packs. So those were the standards. That's where they came from. It was a group of independent artists that built them. They went through a huge process of editing and focus groups, and they are ongoing. The goal next is to include a lot more disability language as we've all grown and learned, but we really wanted to focus on what was happening in 2020 and the fight against producers who think that they're not racist because they didn't vote for Trump. And they think that's not just the bare minimum.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And we just dropped that into the chat, and we'll make sure that we keep referencing that throughout. Oh, I just
One more
realized we
slide.
have a couple more slides.
MENA, MENA, Middle Eastern North African, sometimes preferred by producers from those regions. Latina, a gender neutral form of Latino, Latina. Sorry. That was a whole conversation about using Latinx and things like that. So it's just a term that we picked for the standards.
Oh, yeah. These ones I realized were actually from Hollywood Fringe. These
Okay,
ones
I was like, I
from
don't
our
remember
Hollywood
adding
Fringe.
these, but
Yeah, these are actually from our Access Advisory Board space. And so sorry. You guys, we threw this together a little bit and, over 2 years. And so sometimes some of those things are a little bit from last time. And this one is that. So from Hollywood Fringe, these are some things that our Access Advisory Board wanted to add in that are not in the anti-racist theater standard definitions. And also some things that we really talk about, including intention versus impact. For us, when we're talking about problems that are happening at Hollywood Fringe, we really try to make sure that we are doing a great job of mediating a space. Our goal is that people come to Hollywood Fringe and they have a blast, but sometimes mistakes happen or things happen and there starts to be conflict or things like that. And our number one goal when there's conflict is conflict resolution, unless something is violent in nature or there is additional harm being caused. That being said, we also look at intention versus impact. Intent is what you aimed to achieve through an action, and impact is how that person received that action. However, the impact of that action doesn't always match your intention, and good intentions don't always result in a positive impact. Although our intention is not to hurt somebody, it can lead to harm. So sometimes when we're having conversations with folks in our community about harm, it's really important that we go back to this. It's really important that when you make a mistake or you are being told that maybe you did, that you take a deep breath and avoid defensive reactions that come from white supremacy culture. And also realize that sometimes people's experiences of that can be different. And so we are really, really hoping that that sticks with people in their fringe process. It's something that we think about every day is how are we coming across in this world and how can we make sure that people feel excited to be in this world alongside us. So I'm now going to pass it over to Spencer and Rachel. We're going to read through these amazing definitions of white supremacy, which we're also going to drop in the chat. It is a resource that we have used in the founding of our Access Committee and our Access Advisory Board now and other spaces. So we're really stoked.
Right. So these are the definitions and characteristics of white supremacy and white supremacy culture. So denial and defensiveness, the habit of denying and defending against the ways in which white supremacy and racism are produced and our individual or collective participation in that production. Next is
Then either,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, either or and the binary.
Yeah.
Reduces the complexity of life and the nuance of our relationships with each other and all living things into either or, yes or no, right or wrong in ways that reinforce urgency, one right way perfectionist thinking, and abuse of power.
Individualism, our cultural story that we make it on our own without help while pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, our own bootstraps, is a toxic denial of our essential interdependence and the reality that we are all in this literally together.
One right way, along with perfectionism, paternalism, objectivity, and qualified, the belief there is one right way to do things, connected to the belief in an objective perfect that is both attainable and desirable for everyone, connected to the belief that I am qualified to know what the perfect right way is for myself and others.
Progress is more and quantity over quality. The assumption that the goal is always more and bigger, with an emphasis on what we can objectively measure as more valuable than the quality of our relationships to all living beings.
A worship of written word, honoring only what is written, and even then only what is written to a narrow standard, even when what is written is full of misinformation and lies. An erasure of the wide range of ways we communicate with each other and all living things.
Urgency. Applying the urgency of racial and social justice to our everyday lives in ways that perpetuate power imbalance and disregard for our need to breathe and pause and reflect.
Right to comfort and fear of conflict. The internalization that I or we have a right to comfort, which means we cannot tolerate conflict, particularly open conflict.
Fear. White supremacy culture's number one strategy is to make us afraid. When we are afraid, we lose touch with our power and become more easily manipulated by the promise of an illusory safety.
And these characteristics can be found at that link you see right there. And I think you said we're going to drop some of them in the chat as well. So you'll have access to them in multiple ways as well. And then we do have a question for the audience. It's a little like, it's not interactive necessarily, but it's a you take time for you. Take 2 minutes and look at the definitions of white supremacy culture as defined in the dropped article in the chat. It's also there on screen there, that link. And take a second to think about which of these characteristics resonate with you and which of these are difficult for you to express. And again, you can write these down if you want to jot them down in a notebook, if you just want to think whatever's best for you and your accessibility, whatever you need for that. Take those couple minutes now to kind of think it out.
I'm going to give everybody one more minute. Then we will be moving on in just a minute. All right. We are going to talk now with our friend Emma. Oh, just 1 second, actually. I just saw that we need to add something in the chat. Okay, perfect. We are going to talk with our friend Emma about personal stake and ending white supremacy.
Hi, everyone. So, although it sounds counterintuitive, developing your own personal stake in ending white supremacy is a really great tool to become an anti-racist theater practitioner and organizer, an artivist, if you will. So, what is personal stake? Do I do the next slide? Okay, thank you. Also, sorry, I ran back from getting a Kleenex, so I'm a little winded. So, this is me, the personal stake share from the organizing team member. I have a little worksheet that I've used when I've done some of this work. So I learned about personal stake through my time organizing with White People for Black Lives. It was something that's introduced if you ever do an orientation with that group, because it is like there are studies that have shown that if folks have a deeply personal investment in something, they're a lot more likely to actually join the fight in a sustainable, ongoing way. Versus if folks are like, I'm aware of how that's bad, but I don't think it applies to me personally, but I know it's bad. Again, like psychologically, it's harder for us to stay engaged with the work if it doesn't personally impact us. And I think one way to look at that is to maybe feel guilt or shame that you feel like you have to be personally affected to do something. But I think another way to look at it is to remember that we're all humans and our brains are wired certain ways, and reframe it, because the truth is white supremacy does affect each and every one of us as humans and also all living things on this planet. So with that, a couple questions that'll kind of lead into my own personal stake and maybe help as we go into the next piece. But things to think about: how has white supremacy and the ripple effects of anti-Black racism harmed you personally and your loved ones, including the use of anti-Black racism to justify stigmatizing anyone who needs help, dismantling the welfare state, responding to harm with punishment, including cultural aspects such as extreme self-reliance, individualism, as we saw, perfectionism, a belief in only one right way. And some other questions: how would I personally benefit from the freedom we are fighting for with the movement for Black lives? What is at stake for me, in terms of cultural qualities, the cult of personal responsibility, in terms of healthcare, housing, elder care, child rearing, disability justice, gender. There's so many facets that go into not just anti-racism, but as I said, collective liberation, which are hand in hand. So for me personally, I, for a long time, really, really defined myself by my job, my career, how productive I was, my sense of self-worth, and the perceived value that I thought I gave to other people was how successful I was in my job. Or before I had a job in school, plus my extracurriculars. Like I really existed to make sure that I was producing as much as I was physically, emotionally capable of producing for the perceived benefit of others and at my own discomfort and health, really. And it wasn't until the COVID pandemic and the uprisings of 2020 that I was really forced to stop and slow down in a way that I'd never really had ever in my life. I also I also am originally from Minneapolis. I shared this with the other panelists before, but I'm originally from Minneapolis. No, I shared this with this group. I'm sorry. I also have ADHD, which is something that is related because I did not know I had ADHD until 2020 because I gave no indication of having any sort of so-called disability or neurodiversity because I was producing so much, because I was holding myself to a really impossibly high, unsustainable standard. And when I was forced to stop and slow down and my structure fell apart, I fell apart and I didn't understand why, because I had never really understood what ADHD actually looked like for adults or for people who are women or who were born female. And I it completely like shattered my understanding of like who I was, the relationships that I've had with people. And a lot of those things, when I think about how that ties into anti-racism, I think about a healthcare system that actually works to keep everyone healthy, regardless of what that looks like, and actively works to educate on what neurodiversity is or what other differences in bodies and abilities and brains looks like. And when I got diagnosed, it was very difficult for me to find the treatment that I needed, even with a full-time job and even with a good insurance plan and even with no children and a partner who also had a full-time job. It was a struggle for me to find the care that I needed so that I could live a little bit more easily and survive in the capitalist structure that we have. Because the truth is, I have to work in some capacity if I want to survive. And that is also very much a direct result of white supremacy. A capitalist society is very much about benefiting those at the top and keeping them there, and with this false promise of you can get there too if you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And in that experience, I realized, like, even as someone who carries an immense amount of privilege, it's still really, really hard. And if I'm struggling this much in a system that is supposedly built for people like me, then obviously it's much, much worse for those who don't carry the same privileges I have as an able-bodied, cisgendered white woman, citizen. So that was really what opened my eyes, and it continues to be a struggle. Since then, I was, again, incredibly privileged to be able to take a considerable amount of time off from working full time. My partner's income was able to sustain both of us, which I know I was very privileged to have. And that was how I was able to heal some of those things. But now that I'm working again, because that wasn't something I could do forever, like, I'm still consistently facing, like, I don't really know how to balance these things now that I have these understandings of how my brain works versus what's expected of me and what's expected generally. It's not sustainable. It's not realistic. It's not healthy. And so I really want, like, my personal stake for this work not just in theater, but just like generally, is living in a world that allows everyone to meet everyone where they are and have their needs met easily so that we can be our best selves to each other and live without fear. I think the way things are, there's so much fear and there's so much scarcity mindsets, and not in a like woo-woo, like everything is abundant, money will float, not that, but just like the idea that if I don't get this, or if you get this thing, that means I'm not going to get it, just generally. And that's, I think, really tied to fear. And because we exist in a system that like doesn't give us what we need and reminds us that like, yeah, everyone can't have everything, but really we should be able to. There's enough food for everyone. There's more than enough housing for everyone. We've proven after these fires, there's more than enough clothing for everyone. Like there's no reason why any of us should struggle. So this was a very not polished personal stake, but that's that's where I'm coming from, and that's what this work means to me, and it's my why every day, and it's impossible for me to forget because it's my lived experience. And again, that's with the privileges that I carry. So it's incredibly important to me to make it easier for everyone to live.
Thank you so much for sharing, Emma, first of all. And I think it's just so relatable for so many people, especially in theater, who have been really, watching our industry get destroyed, and watching jobs go away and watching all of this stuff. And, sometimes it can be so disheartening. And sometimes the best way to kind of commit to something is to dream of some better worlds. And I think that for me, when I was first introduced to white only spaces about anti-racism, I was like, this feels really weird. Feels like it maybe shouldn't be, And I think that there's a time and a place, right? So sometimes it is so helpful to be able to talk about the things that you're faced with so that you can be able to process them and then go to work on other people's behalf. And so one thing that we think would be really great is for us to just take 5 minutes in coming up and talking about our own personal stake in white anti-racism work and why, and that doesn't just have to be in white anti-racism work. It can be, why are you doing this for your theater project? It can be, why are you doing this for yourself? And how do you hold your personal stake together with what is at stake for others? What are others going through that might be something for us to kind of hold in that same time? So I hope that makes sense. We're going to take 5 minutes, take some deep breaths, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Nina, if I unscreen share, do you think you could share some of that delicious music so that we can have something while we're writing?
I think so. I'm going to do my best.
Thank you.
I just need 1 minute though, because I closed the link.
Thank you, Sina. Thank you, Emma, for sharing again. And we're going to have a couple of questions in the chat to kind of talk about over the next couple of, or to write about, over the next couple of weeks. What are some ways that you and other white people are impacted as a part of the white system of white supremacy? As white people, we get a lot of cultural messaging around being a savior, a hero, or a rescuer. When have you thought of yourself as a rescuer or a savior? And how is that for you? Is that helpful? Or is that problematic? Does the framework we just discussed change how you see your place within the white supremacy system? So from here, we're going to do a hard pivot. We were talking a lot about things from a white anti-racist lens, about being in like a white organizing space to kind of get ourselves into the meat of the conversation, which is being in a multicultural space, which is Hollywood Fringe. Hollywood Fringe is extremely diverse. Our white folks only make up 54% of our participation base. And so it's really important that as we are moving through these spaces, we bring this work in with us. And we also respect that it is a different space than being in a white anti-racist organizing space where you are centering feelings and you are talking about your stake in it. So I kind of want to introduce this to our panel with the question, after doing this personal stake journey, it can be hard not to center yourself in multiracial spaces. How do you approach anti-racism practices and questions when you're not in fully white spaces?
It's kind of a challenging situation, because if you're in a space that is at least somewhat familiar with folks you've worked with before, it's the line of like, you want to say I'm working on my anti-racism journey, because you can't say I'm not racist, because we're all racist, because this is the white supremacy water we've been swimming in our whole lives. So it's kind of a balance. So normally, I mean, just as the author of one of the many authors of the standards, I tend to start a production saying we will be abiding as close as possible to the LA Anti-Racist Theater Standards. I include them in welcome packets or whatever, and just to kind of throw it out there instead of being like, we're the good white producers. Just saying, like, these are the actions we take in a rehearsal space, and including it just as easily as like, and if you have any questions, this is the stage manager. If you have any like HR concerns, this is the person to talk to. Or if you're running late, or if you need venue, or if you need costume, or if you are dealing with a microaggression, right? Just like including it in the process as much as it would be normalized as possible.
One thing, like, it's interesting because with theater, when I mentioned I worked before, I used to work in corporate a lot. And so that like whole experience has informed a lot of how I show up in these spaces, and also like kind of showed me how not to. But so in my theater work, I've mostly almost exclusively been doing solo work. So I'm kind of the only person that I'm dealing with most of the time. But in work settings, like, I guess something that I try to do is really center accessibility in the room. And I use that word because I think in spaces, I know we're talking specifically about multicultural spaces and not white spaces, but I do feel like sometimes white folks in those spaces are on like higher alert and higher defense. And so when it's framed, and as I'm saying this, I'm like, is this pandering, and do I need to adjust how I'm doing this? But when I frame it as like accessibility, then I know that that's encompassing of anti-racism. And if it's not explicitly, if that's not like catching on, then I will make that explicit. But it's a broad understanding to make sure that like everyone feels welcome. And so then I'll be vocal and challenge that. If it doesn't feel like we're actually upholding that value, then I'll share like, okay, if everyone's not welcome, like how do we make sure that truly everyone is welcome to these spaces, or being considered if we're making a policy or setting up a program or something?
I'm really struggling with this question. And I think, as everyone else is saying, because it is really tricky. And I think a lot of things that I'm kind of thinking about is the idea that I, as a white, straight, cisgender male, always am going to have my voice heard. So for me, it's a matter of taking my voice and not gifting, that's a really terrible word, but being like, hey, I know that you're going to listen to me. I know that you're going to do this. I know that you're going to do that. But who do I need to like speak up for, or give that floor to, give that space to? And I think that it's tricky, like we're saying, in a multicultural space, because I'm not the one who should be the one to be speaking up, but I also don't want to put that burden on everyone else to be like, hey, don't do that, don't do this. But I think it all comes down to, if I as the straight cis white man is like, hey, that's not cool. Let me tell you why. Or hey, have we thought about this? Have we thought about this? It's going to be something that everyone else can, go, oh, wait a second, I didn't think about that. Thank you for telling me. And then it allows me to educate to the best of my abilities, and educate to where I feel comfortable educating. So then everyone else can kind of branch off and educate from there. And I might not be making complete sense, but I also know that as we come in from this, systemic white supremacy, as we're talking about, people who are systemically white supremacists will listen to a straight cis white man. And then if I can do my part to help, guide people like, hey, there's other people you should listen to. Hey, this, et cetera, have that list of things that I can offer to at least start the conversation and get it going. That's something that I feel in a multicultural space. And I said feel, but I shouldn't say that. But in a multicultural space is something that I know that I can do, is I can access the privilege that I have in that space and say, hey, and then give that list. And so I think that's, for me, where I would start, is to just know where I live in that space and what I'm able to access and be able to kind of branch off from there and dive in, if that makes sense. I got really like excited about it, but then also was like, wow. But it's also something that we don't think about, is that like just being a straight cis white man, I have privilege, and I don't think about it because I haven't had to experience as much as, certain underrepresented populations. And so that's something for me that through my training I've learned to just know that I can speak up to allow others to speak up as well.
Yeah, definitely. Rachel, do you want to share?
Yeah. So the question was around like decentering yourself, right? So I think that part of that decentering is like being in a position of listening and being open, while also, like what Spencer said, not putting the burden on BIPOC people to educate you. So there's a balance of doing your own education and research and probing internally your own questions while not putting that burden on others. But also being really open for feedback, knowing always with the understanding that this is a never ending, ongoing, forever process. You're never going to like get an A+ in anti-racism work, and you're never going to get A+ in dismantling white supremacy culture. As what Michaela said, we're swimming in a culture of white supremacy. Our nation and the entire West, we're built through white supremacy. So it's a lot of acknowledging and knowing that without fear, and doing a lot of like inner care for yourself so that you're not putting that anxiety on those who are most deeply impacted, would be my first thought.
I'd love to. Oh, go ahead. There's
Oh,
me
yeah.
with.
Yeah, I see, Tamika, that you have your hand raised. Would you like to unmute and talk to us?
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm here twice working from two devices, one on my cell phone and trying to use like on the green and on my laptop because there's no webcam on my laptop, but there's a camera on my phone. I don't put this. I just wanted to ask, and I hope I'm not taking, I'm very time, and I hope I'm not taking everybody off their agenda, but what exactly are these workshops supposed to do?
That's a great question, and I can answer that.
I saw this in my inbox because I've been trying to figure out how to get into the Hollywood Friends. I've been applying for the Hollywood Friends for a long time with my solo show, and I too did a good experience in the application process. And my friend, the late Ella Turan, who encouraged me prior to passing, encourages me. But I remember the workshop of the application. It was on like just on because you all do provide this. I was saying behind that and something wording, and I just remember just being like that was the best. What exactly is the friends and other white artists looking to achieve with these workshops?
Yeah, totally. I can answer that from the Hollywood Fringe perspective. And I'm so glad that you brought up Ella Tren, because Ella was one of my friends and also actually a mentor of mine and really helped me build my career. And so that's so special that you brought her up. Ella was an artist in 2018 and was one of our scholarship winners. And during that year, her and I talked a lot about how to make Hollywood Fringe a better place, because it was a place that, to be quite honest, even our staff didn't really feel safe in. It was a heavy drinking culture. It was a space where lots of people were having microaggressions on a daily basis. And then there also was this other side of things where you had vibrant, incredible art being done by incredible people, including Ella. Ella's show was so amazing. And she encouraged me to go to the Activate program through Arts for LA, and I want to shout them out because she pushed me into that. And then we were able to start to put some legs in motion to make Hollywood Fringe an actual organization. So if you think about it, people, when they hear Hollywood Fringe, they think big institution. And that's because we've always really centered artists. And so we've always had a giant artistic impact. We've given over $5 million back to artists and ticket sales since 2010. But we didn't have a full-time staff, and we didn't even have a part-time staff. Sina and I were both staff members at the time, and also Lois was, and we were getting paid, a couple $1,000s at the end of the year to throw together this festival. And it really led us to professionalize and realize that we had a space that we needed to protect. And it really led us into the artist commissioning that I think you brought up, Tamika, which was our scholarship program and then our artist funded programs, because we were seeing that the areas around us were not funding artists. Our scholarship program applications are closed for this year, but our artist fund applications are open right now, and we can add information in the chat. But so we had this whole thing, and so I wrote into a grant that we are going to do the access committee because I was like, how are we going to address this? And Ella and Spencer and about 10 different artists decided we were going to do this in January 2020. And then the pandemic happened. And instead, what we got the beautiful blessing of doing was sitting and unpacking Hollywood Fringe and all of the things that were wrong and all of the things that were right. And we got to really be able to kind of navigate into this new organization that we are going to be, which was a real training ground for artists, a real place where artists could come and take free workshops and be able to educate themselves without having to have a degree on anything. And the reason that we started this workshop right here, and the reason that it is for white artists, is because our access committee was tired of doing the labor of educating the white folks in our community. It is really exhausting for our volunteer BIPOC advisory board and disabled advisory board to do that. That is not really their space. And so what is their space is fostering a sister space, which happens during the festival. And that is a access committee BIPOC affinity space where BIPOC folks get to talk to BIPOC folks about what their experiences are within our spaces. And the reason that we are doing this one in February and that one in June is because we're prepping our next generation of fringers to understand our ethos so that we can all come together this summer at Hollywood Fringe, have a blast, and also really unpack some of the work that LA Theater needs to do in order to become a more equitable place. It is not at the moment. And how do we address that, especially as people are facing more and more and more harm within our communities? So that's the Hollywood Fringes side of things and kind of why we started this space. I'm going to have Sina, one of our staff members who's on the chat, Tamika, send you some of the other registration assets and some of our other more educational workshops on the producer side of things too. So if you're interested in that, that's great. And we'd love to talk to you more. And then also for any artist who's watching this, and if you're like, wow, Hollywood Fringe is so overwhelming to me and I need somebody to talk to, we got you. Starting this year, you can book a 30-minute call with one of our amazing staff members, Roddy Villegas, who will walk you through how to do Hollywood Fringe, walk you through your marketing plan. You can book as many of these sessions as you need. It is included with your interest in doing Fringe. It's not just for registered artists. So it's for you to come in and be able to say, is Hollywood Fringe right for me before you kind of dive in and do that work. And closer to the festival, also hold those sessions so that you can kind of go over your marketing plan, go over your ideas, and make sure that you're in line with a lot of the majority of what people have done here. We're a self-produced festival, so, there's only so much we can control, but these are the ways that we can kind of help people navigate. So, yeah. I'm going to dive back into the panel. And I really want to talk a little bit about how we approach conversations about anti-racism with non-white folks. How does it look different than addressing this in an echo chamber of white artists? What does it look like to talk about anti-racism in Hollywood Fringe?
I'm sorry, Ellen, could you repeat that question?
Oh, yeah, it's just for our panelists, and it's just about how do we approach conversations about anti-racism with non-white folks, and how does it look different than a space like one today, where we're just having an echo chamber of white artists talking about anti-racism from our kind of removed experience?
Well, I think in this setting, it's the setting, the intent is to educate, unlearn, and grow and like, step into those spaces where we can grow. And so what it could look like with non-white folks is, again, keeping in mind not centering yourself as the perfect anti-racist or knowing everything, but also not centering yourself as, or not burdening others with questions, but being open with, here to support, here's how I know how to support, here's how I've learned how to support, and dismantle white supremacy culture. And I'm open for suggestions if that's something that you're open to giving me, without the requirement that I need you to teach me. So I think it's with like, yes, a deep like awareness and sensitivity of that labor.
I think for me, it's also like, this one is sort of tricky for me to answer because I don't feel like it's something that just kind of comes up. But if I'm in a conversation with someone and maybe we're just like talking about our experiences in this festival, and if I'm hearing that like, oh, wow, your experience is really different from mine, it's first noticing that. And then what I imagine I would do is just ask, like, is there something, like, do you need something different? Or not even do you need something different, but just like what Rachel was saying, like thinking about how I might be able to support, or maybe if I'm in a position where I'm able to like remove a roadblock or make a connection that could make those experiences more equitable. I guess that's my approach. But the first thing really is just like having conversations, hearing about what folks are experiencing, and noticing like, are we having different experiences, and thinking about like, what do I think is driving that, or asking like, what do you think is driving that, and considering like, how can I do something? Is there something that I can control or do that will make it more equitable?
I'd love to bring it in. Oh, does somebody else have something before I?
Well, I have like one thing to piggyback off of that. It's just like the power of listening and the power of reflective listening and empathic listening and holding space and being a container without, like, sometimes it's good to be in a position and to recognize your privilege of helping and supporting, and then also sometimes not wanting to fix or change, and respecting that, like, oh yeah, this being in a position of like listening to someone vent about whatever the experience is too can be helpful, in asking people what they need, like, how can I best, like the consent around support, like, how can I best support you? Do you want solutions? Do you want, like someone to be next to you, advocating with you? Do you just want to vent and listen and have someone listen to you?
Going off of that of the listening is really, like, if someone is calling you out on something, take it as a compliment, because it means that they feel safe enough with you to call you out. And so say thank you. Like, if someone is like, "Hey, this sucked, this action that you did," instead of like, one of the first things we talked about was defensiveness and being like, "Oh, I didn't mean it. I'm so sorry. Blah 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 blah. White women tears. I'm a good white person." It's just saying thank you. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I will work harder to do better next time. And also, like we all said, like the self-awareness of what does it mean to be in a white, what to be a, specifically speaking from cisgendered female experience, of what does it mean to be a white woman in a predominantly BIPOC space, and how is that power dynamic and that sense of danger, for not that I am in danger, that I am the danger in the space specifically, and how could that make people feel of just my pure presence as a white woman in the room? How can that impact the conversations that are happening? How can that impact the truth that's being told? So just that self-awareness, even as a theater producer, of saying like, okay, so if we're having this conversation, like maybe I should step out, even though I'm the producer, because these conversations are not going to be as truthful with my perceived power dynamic. So Those are the
I
things
wanted
that
to
entering.
I wanted to quickly piggyback off of Michaela because you brought up something about the way in which we respond to someone who is calling us out on something. And I just want to share a quick story because it devastated me, but I've also learned the error of my ways from the past. One thing specifically is I was taking a class on Zoom during the pandemic, and I was talking and I was just talking and I kept saying white privilege. We were talking about white privilege and I kept using quotation marks around white privilege. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like, I used my hands. I talk with my hands. And they said, wait a second, hold on. You keep putting quotes around white privilege. Like, I don't like that. There is white privilege. I don't know why you're using quotes. And everyone was like, yeah, yeah. And I looked and I was like, you're right. I don't know why I was doing that. I was like, my bad, my apologies. And they're like, all right, you're cool, you're cool, like whatever. So it was fine. It was great. But it was this moment of me going, oh, I didn't even realize I was doing that. And so I guess it is like you're saying, Michaela, like the way in which you respond to it, and like people maybe they do feel comfortable being like, hey, I know that if I tell him something, he's gonna be like, okay, cool, my bad, I got it, let me move on. Versus the like, well, no, but I'm really good at everything. Like, so I think that it made me think of that when you brought that up. So I think that's a really good point. Just like understanding that if I'm being told that I'm doing something like that, it's like that's not correct. Like, don't use quotes around that. I'm like, yep, you know what? You're right. I didn't think about it. It wasn't, but they also knew that my intention wasn't to harm. It may have harmed, but that wasn't my intention. So they knew that they were like, hey, let me tell you, let me educate you. Let me tell you why that's not appropriate, why that's not working. And I was like, you're right. And so I just want to bring that up because it was a story that still haunts me to this day that I did it because I wasn't aware. And that was prior to all of the anti-racism training that I was taking. So I was like, I just wasn't aware of my own inherent biases going into everyday life. And so I just wanted to share that story that I'm not perfect at the very
So
least.
literally, when I was like early in my anti-racism journey, and I didn't understand what the word racism was and that it's a systemic thing, I was like, well, wouldn't that be reverse racism? And like, again, that is a cringy thing I said early college when I was dumb as hell. And I still, 10 years, 15 years later, I'm still like, I can't believe I said that. That's so awful. But we learn and we move forward.
Unlearning is so cringy. It makes you feel so awful. And I think that sometimes sitting in that uncomfortable feeling was something that like I really needed to learn how to do. Like for me, I hate being uncomfortable. I'm a Taurus and I also believe in astrology. So, I'm a vibes person and sitting in bad vibes, yikes. But it's like such an important practice to do and to be like, I suck sometimes, you know? Spencer, yeah.
I just wanted to redeem myself with another story that was on the like the other side of things where I did something, and I tell you, this was 10 years ago when I was doing my master's program, and I didn't even realize like what advocacy meant at the time. And I didn't realize that I actually advocated for like everyone without realizing it because I was doing my thesis film. It was a story about my lived experience, right, as a music therapist, all this stuff. And my producer looks at me and she goes, so do you want to cast someone that looks like you? Like, what are you thinking? And I looked at her and I went, well, I don't care what they look like. They just need to like embody me. And she was like, okay, great. And at that point, I didn't realize that that was in a way advocating for like in terms of like that conscious like the conscious casting, right? Like of just being like, oh, I just want someone who embodies my spirit. I don't care outside of that. It doesn't bother me. And I think it also goes back, and this is just something I thought of like in terms of casting, like right with Hamilton, and they do a great job of being like, okay, these are historical figures, but they're not specifically beholden to a specific look, right? And I think I'm going to get into this might be really off topic, but like something like, for instance, like if you're thinking about your shows and who you're writing, the characters that you're writing for, be aware that like if you have Martin Luther King Jr. in your script and someone is playing Martin Luther King Jr., it needs to be someone who fits that physical description of Martin Luther King Jr., right? Versus like a clerk in a grocery store, at a gas station or whatever, like thinking of conscious casting in that terms where if it's not specific to a specific type or look, to think about going outside the box and thinking like that. But does that make sense? I think it makes sense. But just thinking about like if you are a white artist who is writing a script with Martin Luther King Jr. for whatever reason, one, have you done the research? do you have the access to what you would need to tell the story of Martin Luther King Jr.? I'm using MLK for that was just the first person that pops into my mind, I guess, because we just had the celebration in January. So I was like, I guess that was the first thing I thought of. But again, I'm happy to talk further on casting because I've learned a lot from my years of casting. But that's just something to be aware of if you're writing a show. You can't just because it's a character in your script play that character. You need to be aware of who you are as an individual and if it is okay for you to be playing that character. So that's just something to think about as you are writing your scripts.
Yeah, actually, that really leads into conscious casting and talking a little bit about how we do bring anti-racism into our casting processes. How do you go about casting in a way that brings that understanding into the rehearsal room? And then also, I would really love to touch on, in addition, after we kind of talk about casting, writing, or if it comes in tandem, how do white folks who are writing ensemble plays write shows? How does that work? What are you doing when you are writing a character outside of your experiences? And what are ways that folks can pursue their creative passions and also be conscious of the idea of writing from an experience that they don't live in?
I know that Spencer could talk so much more on casting. The specific thing that I want to touch on is an example of two shows that I did last year that were, like Spencer was saying, it was one show was a 3-person cast of a Korean man, a half black, half Korean woman, and then a black young girl. And we were able to get all 3 of those, like, honestly, perfectly. And that was fantastic. Specifically the half black, half Korean character. And then the other show that was a partner piece with this show, it was called Two Stop and Pink Spa, written by, oh my God, I'm forgetting his name. His name's David, but I can't remember his last name right now. I'm so sorry. I've been on Zoom calls all day. But that one had a much larger cast with a lot of diversity in it, and it came into very specifically identity conscious casting. We knew we weren't going to be able to get a full Korean family, but we were focused on what does it mean to be half Asian? What does it mean to be a quarter Asian? What does it mean to be a Chinese woman or a Japanese woman married to a Jewish man? And so that was more of the identity we were looking for. So even though we were able to get the full Korean grandpa, we were able to get a half Asian, half white son, which was true to the story, but he just wasn't Korean. And then we were able to get a quarter Asian, 3/4 white actress, even though it wasn't necessarily specifically Korean. And so they still understood the concept of the characters and the truth of the characters of what does it mean to be, in the term of this story, like Asian enough and participating in your family culture, because they all lived that experience, even though it wasn't necessarily directly Korean. And then there's also, we were grappling with the fact of what does it mean to, and I was also the only white person on the production teams. And what does it mean to consolidate Asian identities that way? And the thing that we really talked about was the person who is talking about the specifically Korean experience was Korean. And so that was the way that we were able to feel what's important. And then what does it mean to be half American, half Asian? And, what is that? So that was where we landed and had a really long conversation with the playwright, with the director, both of whom were various types of Asian identity, and with the actors themselves and the family that they were building within the plot of this play and the community of this play. So that was, I know Asian identities can get really challenging in casting because of just the pure diversity that comes with the Asian experience, and what does it mean to look Asian and be Asian enough and things like that. And so that I felt that was something I was really scared of, is like, how are we going to find a quarter Korean actor specifically in this age range? But I felt like it was, oh, you saw Pink Spot, thanks. And so that was a really challenging casting, but also was beautiful. And I think they really nailed it. And I didn't really, and also like, you know, there were a lot of white people who just really like Asian culture. And I was the person in Actors Access, like, filtering through, and I just didn't even invite them to. If they were like, well, I'm not Asian, but I love Asian culture, I did not invite them to participate because I couldn't risk them fetishizing my Asian actors. And so that was also the decision I made as a producer and of course there were roles for white people and there were roles for various other non-Asian people in this play, but yeah, so those were kind of the choices that we made. And also, if somebody didn't read the Actors Access close enough to realize that this was supposed to be an Asian 20-year-old and you're a white 60-year-old lady, then that's a whole other conversation. But
I just wanted to piggyback off of what Michaela said regarding that casting, where I think you said something point like it was hard, but it was fulfilling finding that. And I just wanted to I wanted to give you a shout out for that, but also realizing people that you are looking for exist. You just have to find them. You have to do the research. You have to put in the time, the effort to do it. It's not just like, well, those are the people that submitted and that's what I'm going with. Because I also was looking at it and I wrote down some notes because I was like, casting that's my jam. But I was like, I have people like right now helping a buddy of mine work on a movie. And he's like, hey, I posted on Backstage or whatever. I was like, great, you're probably going to get like 6 people on Backstage and they may all be white. They may all be whatever. And I was like, here, let me send you some people. And so I just sent him talented people that are of varying diverse natures of all, underrepresented populations. And it's like, it's for me, it's going, I want to put into different directors' minds of like just casting the best person. Unless it's like I said, unless it's a specific type, like Michaela's looking for specific types and specific ethnicities, then like you want to cater to that. But if it's like this is for like a role of a driver, I'm like anybody can play. It's like someone who's funny and someone who's charismatic. I'm like, there are a lot of people that are funny and charismatic. Here's a long list of people. Here's a bunch of different types that you have access to. But what I love about it is that I'm sending these all to him, and I'm not like, here are the these people that you want. Here are these people. I'm like, here are the 10 people that I think would be good for this role. And it's just like these are everyone. So it's not like separating people into different groups. It's like here are 10 great people. Who do you want? And so I think that that's something that also that I've actively been thinking about is not being like, well, I need to have this, I need to have this. It's like, okay, I've got 10 roles and I'm casting the 10 best people in the roles, bringing people in and doing that versus the mindset of, oh, I need these and I need this type and I need this type and I need this type. So, I mean, again, unless it's very specific, like looking for, which is one thing that I know a lot of casting directors do. And so keep in mind that a lot of times it'll be like BIPOC encouraged to submit or, you know, this type is encouraged to submit because that means that casting directors are actively looking for that type, that ethnicity, that underrepresented population. So I posted a lot of casting notices of my day, and that's something I often forget to post. And so that's something that I'm doing better with, and I'm working towards doing better is because I think when there's an expectation of, hey, please submit if you are one of these underrepresented populations, because in the parentheses of what you're not seeing is I'm actively looking for these diverse types. And those are also for non-diverse roles. They're just like a doctor, professor, whatever the case may be. So they're not. And so that's what's also really cool is that it's just like for the driver, I'm just casting someone who is fun and charismatic. That's all I want.
Yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead, Rachel. Or
I have one quick suggestion just about the writing aspect. I think if anyone's writing anything that is not of your own lived personal experience, especially if it's a BIPOC experience, I would suggest that you get consultation and that you compensate that person. Very important to compensate that person for that consultation. And also with the caveat and understanding that BIPOC individuals are often tasked with speaking for their entire community. So being really extra aware and sensitive to that would be my suggestion. Might not be the only suggestion, but a thought that I had in terms of writing.
I was going to say something similar. And I would also encourage like thinking if it's not your lived experience, what's the story that you're trying to tell and why are you trying to tell it? And are you the person to tell that story? I think those are important questions to ask all the time, but especially in this context. And yeah, just reiterate, like noting what your inspirations are. If you're not working with someone directly and compensating them for their sharing with you, and also ensuring that they're like fully informed on like how you're using this information, how it will be presented, if and how they would be credited in some way, then yeah, are there texts or other works that you are pulling inspiration from, and are you crediting those accordingly and making sure that folks understand kind of where you're drawing your inspiration? Yes.
And just from the Fringe perspective, we are an uncurated festival, except for when you break our code of conduct. So if your content breaks our code of conduct, that is also a reason that you can be expelled from the festival. We've never had to do that, but we have had to have conversations where we went in and talked with the playwright about what was going on in the scene or in a small instance of their work. So it's not just your overarching narrative that can be problematic. It's sometimes doing something wrong in just one little scene. And one thing that I think is really important to do is to make sure you're getting your script read by your friends, your family, and people who have maybe different ideologies than you, so you can get those different perspectives. And second, if you're concerned about something, you can set up a meeting with Hollywood Fringe. So Lois and I, or Roddy, but usually Lois and I, will go on that call with you, talk you through that issue, make sure that you have the right plan moving forward to make the adjustments necessary to be able to write from that perspective. Because one of the worst things that we've seen is, we have seen shows get passed up because somebody will be like, wow, an industry member will go, wow, I just went and saw this show. It's a solo show, and it was about this identity. And somebody next to them goes, that person is an X, right? And the industry person goes, well, then I'm passing. And so I also want to point out that it is good for your career for you to follow these inclusive tasking processes. And it is good for you, for your career, to write from yourself. Because A, it's not going to come across as authentic if you're not writing from your own perspective. B, people can sniff that out a mile away. And C, it will kind of leave this bad taste in people's mouths because they will start to be like, well, why did that person feel that way? Unless you are being explicit about how you're doing things. So some ways people have combated that is by hiring cultural consultants. Some of that has been, I'm going to write this, or I'm going to co-write this with somebody. I'm going to write this and then have it be directed by somebody from that identity. I am going to work with my artists to make sure that they have a full say in this one small character so that artists themselves can make those reviews as they're going through. So say you have a small role in your that is from an identity that you don't have, but you have written it in a way that feels good to you, still being open to that actor being able to say, this doesn't feel authentic to me. This is not me, because you're going to get better stuff from your actor. So that's just some things that from the Fringe end of things. And if you do have questions, please email us at Spencer.
Michaela, if yours is regarding this, I would say go ahead and jump in because I'm going to kind of shift gear a second. So Michaela, go first and then I'll jump in.
just about writing. I would just avoid any writing in any vernacular that is not of your own nature. Like if somebody's like, just write out what you want them to actually be saying, and then in parentheses you can say in broken English or in Spanish or in like. But writing it out is just the direct way to problematic microaggressions. I did a show that was supposed to be in a African American vernacular, and it was somebody that wasn't Black, and it just sounded all sorts of problematic. Where you could just say, work with a director or a linguist or a cultural person, or work with the actor, but like just don't put it in the script because it's just gonna lead to microaggressions if you're because people don't talk that way if you don't know how they talk. So anyway, rant over.
Is there anything about writing?
Actually,
or any other thoughts about writing before we switch gears? Because I think we'll complete.
Yeah, I do actually want to piggyback off of that because I remember one time. So I had done a show 8 years ago, at Fringe, and I wrote it all myself, and it was like basically a husband and a wife role, and I had multiple people come up to me after the show, and they're like, you wrote a female character so well. Like, what inspired you to do that?" And I was like, I just wrote people like just how I think they would have a conversation. And they're like, well, you did it really well. So it made me think of like when you're writing, just write naturally, write like don't try and like characterize these characters and things like just as you're saying, Michaela, like just write it. Just write the thing and let the experience that person's lived experience come through in the storytelling. Don't try like I was like I just wrote because they were like your character was smart and intelligent. And I was like I I mean that's what I thought I should write is smart and intelligent. So just keep thinking about writing smart and intelligent characters. But I want to talk about supporting shows. I don't know if we're getting there. I'll wait if we're not, but I wanted to talk about supporting shows at the Fringe. Can I talk about that now? Is that cool? Or you want me to wait?
All right, do you mind clarifying what that
Yeah.
means?
Oh, about like going to see different, unique, diverse shows and like making.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go
What
ahead.
percent? Okay, great, great. And I won't mention this person because I didn't get permission to talk about it, but I wanted to talk about a show that I saw several years ago. It was a solo show. I hadn't met this person beforehand, and based on the description of the show, I was like, "Oh, this is about this person's lived experience. I don't know if I'm going to get anything out of it." So I already went into the show being like, "I don't know if this show's for me," without giving it a chance. And afterwards, I told them, I said, "I related so much to your show." And I don't have any of the lived experience. Like we have different lived experiences, but I related so much to it. It was a story about they had one parent was white, one parent was black, and how they kind of navigated like where they fit into the world. And for me, I have partial blindness, so I feel like I have some element of disability and some of that straight cis white male privilege. And so for me, I watched that show and I went, oh, I have a similar experience as far as like where I fit into the world, even though my lived experience is different. And I almost didn't go to that show because I didn't think I would connect to it. And it is a show that I thought about. I think that was like 2018, 2019. I mean, I thought about it for years since then. And I told them, I was like, your show meant so much to me as someone who has struggled with identity as far as like where I feel like I fit in, that I would have never thought about that. So my point is going and supporting artists and maybe seeing shows that you weren't necessarily thinking about seeing because maybe they don't, maybe you're like, I don't know if I would relate to this, or I don't know if I understand exactly what the show's about. Go see different types of shows you might not actually otherwise see. If you're like, I don't like musicals, go see a musical. If you're like, I don't like cabarets, I don't like this, go see something. Go see something that's different because it could be your favorite show of the festival. You never know. But that's just an experience that I had because it was like 5 or 6 years ago, and it sticks with me to this day as a show that I almost didn't give a chance because I didn't think I would relate to it, and it turned out to be one of the shows I related to the most over the 8 years that I've been seeing shows at the festival. And just if you don't know me, I see a lot of shows every year. I see like close, I think it was like between like 50 and 70 plus a year that I see. So in terms of how many shows I've seen, that show from 5, 6 years ago stood out to me. It's so I would say give artists a chance and give yourself a chance to experience something you might not otherwise think is in your wheelhouse of something you like to see.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit now about tools and practices to reduce harm and navigate conflict when it arises. And I'd love to get Rachel's perspective too, because I know you have such a unique perspective from both of your brains.
Sure. Yeah, I think nonviolent communication. So if you don't know what that is, there's like a really fast read or audiobook that you can get through fairly quickly. And that is the principles around that are using I statements, non-judgment. So an example would be like, when you said that, you made me feel angry and I'm pissed off now. So that's putting a lot of blame on someone else versus taking responsibility for your own feelings. So a nonviolent communication way of saying that would be making an observation. When you said this X, Y, and Z, I felt angry, sad, disappointed, multiple feelings that you can have, and then making a request around how you'd like that communication or that interaction to go for the future. So that's one, like fairly easy way to navigate high intensity conflict because that can be, difficult for our nervous systems. Like, we're hardwired to get defensive. Like, defensiveness is normal. Feeling angry is normal. Feeling overly emotional is normal. And so emotion regulation is going to be really important for conflict resolution. So within a framework of anti-racism work, if someone is giving you feedback about harm that you unintentionally or intentionally caused and it wasn't your intent, so maybe not intentionally, then really doing a lot of inner work, breathing, maybe saying, I really want to hear that feedback. I'm going to take just like 5 minutes to breathe, and so that I can be really present and receptive to what you're hearing, what you're telling me. Because when we're in like a hyper aroused state or like a traumatized state or anxious state, like your prefrontal cortex turns off. There's no, like, you can't take in new information at all. So resolving that conflict with that person you might have harmed would be moot if you did it in a way where you were dysregulated. And then normalizing that it's okay to be dysregulated and feel upset. We all, I imagine, in this theater space, like, we're all good people wanting to like do nice things, and it never feels good to know that you've caused harm, but we are human and that's part of living life. And then just looking into like specific types of listening skills, like reflective listening, active listening. So a quick way to like summarize reflective listening is just kind of repeating back to someone what they've just said, but maybe in your own words, in a way where it shows the other person that you've digested the information and that they feel heard. I cannot even tell you like how, like, the wonders that that can do for someone to be like so upset and you did this and you did that and you did this, to look at them in the eye, take a deep breath and say, what I'm hearing you say is X, Y, and Z. Did I get that right? And the person will literally just be like, yeah, yeah, you did. And you can watch them like fully regulate and calm down and not be as upset anymore, and really making sure to not be defensive, right? Like, it's really hard. It's so normal to be defensive. It's like part, have a lot of compassion with yourself if you are defensive. That's just part of our way of like protecting ourselves. And but knowing that like being defensive invalidates other people and their feelings. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah. And then I wanted to ask Michaela on the flip side too, when we're approaching conflict resolution in multiracial spaces and in a rehearsal space, how do we center the safety and security of those most harmed through systemic issues? And are there any examples of that?
I always get in the way. When I see a microaggression and again, I'm a loud person who has personally very thick skin. I'm not like, so I know that I can take up a lot of space. And also I know my own personal position. Like, I'm not an actor. I don't care if I piss off a director. I don't care. Like, I work in marketing and I work in arts admin. I'm in a very valuable part in our community. So like, I've pissed off a lot of people and I still get jobs because they still need admin help. And so I recognize that other level of privilege. And so when I see normally an older white male saying something problematic to a younger BIPOC, normally woman, I jump in immediately. I say, what did you mean by that? Or could you apologize? Or like, I just get in the way and kind of like, and it's not a savior complex because we can tell again, it's like, you can tell the difference between somebody who just like made a mistake, or even like Spencer had a perfect example of like, you said a word and you were like, that's a terrible word to use. And you immediately took it back and nobody jumped down your throat because we all know what you're talking about. Versus like, we've seen it. We've seen microaggressions, and to immediately call it out and say, what did you mean by that? Or that's not appropriate, or I think you should apologize, and getting in the space. It's the same thing as like, and I've done a lot of bystander training, and it's the same thing. It's the like making sure that they are in a safe distance away from the situation. That is what I have done, and it still sucks. It's still hard. It's still really scary, but necessary. And it's not a savior system. It's that I know I have less to lose in the situation than potentially someone else.
I'll add in, like, if it's a group setting, it's similar with, like, really the question is like, what did you mean by that? And I also think there's a lot of like power in asking that in as not in a tone policing way, but like in as neutral a way as possible, because it really forces the other person to be like, oh yeah, what did I mean by that? And I just think, especially also honestly with like older white men, just being really direct of like, I don't understand what you mean. Can you explain it to me? And really like holding up a mirror to the thing that they just said and expecting them and like yeah, expecting them to fully explain what they meant by that in front of all these people, because they just felt really comfortable saying it, so they should feel really comfortable elaborating on it right now when questioned. And if they don't feel comfortable with that, then okay. Then that's a moment of self-reflection, I hope, and will start to incite change. But yeah, the power of like the neutral, and that is a direct quote, because like when I'm saying it in that way, I'm not feeling neutral, but I am appearing neutral to really, I think, shine a light, I guess.
So why do you think that is another great one? Well, I've heard a lot of like, well, I'm not going to get cast because they're prioritizing BIPOC artists. And I was like, why do you think you should get cast over BIPOC people? And then it's like, oh, there's a little bit of internalized white supremacy that you're inherently better. So, which we all have sometimes, but
Do we?
sorry,
Yeah, and
Oh,
you're good. I just want to quickly piggyback off of this because we talk about the like calling someone out like in a group setting, especially. Y'all, I got called out on Zoom as I talked about earlier, and I felt so uncomfortable in that Zoom room. I can only imagine in a in-person space how uncomfortable it would be for me for someone to call me out on something, and everyone's watching me, and I'm like, oh boy. But then I guess it also is, again, when we're talking about people who are willing to change versus people who are not, their responses are going to be very different to that. And I think that like for me going, oh, I was like, no, I was like, hopefully no one like hates me after this. Like that was like that's when I was like, oh, I need to be more self-conscious of what I say, and even if it's what I say, it's how I say it. And like we were talking about like intent, right? Like what is the intent and the impact? And so I think that that's I just wanted to throw that out there because y'all being in a Zoom room getting called out was uncomfortable enough for me that I never want to get called out in a real in-person space because it was rough.
Before we hop off, does anybody have any questions? You can throw them in the chat. Nobody? Okay, then I'm going to close it out with, we talk about community a lot in these spaces. How can you use anti-racism to build community? And what does that mean to you?
I think community is central. Like I had mentioned, that was kind of a catalyst for me, recognizing that I didn't have the community that I had before in this new place. But to me, community and like focusing on fostering community, which isn't just like finding a bunch of friends. it's being in community with people, helping each other, sharing your resources, sharing your knowledge. And to me, that it's the antidote to individualism. And individualism is, I think, what keeps people stuck in a lot of these things, is believing that like I have to take care of myself first. And it is my responsibility to get to where I need to be. I can't accept help from anyone else. I can't offer help to anyone else because it's on me to do it, just like it's on everyone else. Community says like, no, that's a lie. And we're here to help each other and be interdependent. Did I answer it?
You absolutely did.
I mean, I
Yeah, I'm
love
just
a
gonna
good protest, activism, advocacy. Like Ellen and Emma, I didn't know that you guys met white people for Black lives. And then there's this crossover community into Hollywood Fringe. Like, I just think it's great to me, I think it's great to build community through action. So finding ways to get organized and get involved. And there's so many organizations to involve yourself in. So that's kind of outside of Hollywood Fringe, but it's, you know,
Getting involved is key, y'all.
yeah.
It really builds comfortability for you to be able to talk. When you are doing anti-racism organizing, you are actively making a better community. And that can look different. It doesn't have to just be, White People for Black Lives or Aware LA, which is a great space that if you really want to be able to talk in a fully white space. Aware was such an amazing space for me to really be able to explain myself and to find my voice within anti-racism and to find find out how many problems, I was really having. But then there's also other spaces. There are other organizing spaces, and there's also advocacy spaces for the arts. I think right now so many people are being threatened from not being funded anymore for the arts, and white people more than ever need to make sure that we are saying that the arts needs to be diverse. The arts needs equity and inclusion, that this is central to our work and community building. Michaela and Spencer, I want to make sure you guys both have a really quick chance to talk.
Two things. One, just anti-racism work I find extremely optimistic. All of the spaces I've been in have big hopes and dreams for the future, and that's a nice space to be in. I know it's scary to be like, oh, I'm putting myself in a position where I could be called out, but it's because of care. Like, they care, like, these people care about me and I care about them, and we're all trying to just build a better society together. And that's really lovely. And then advocacy, yeah, if you are a white person, you should be advocating. You should be showing up to your city council meetings, your senators' offices. You should be calling people because these spaces are used to you being in them. Like state capitals, city hall are used to white people being in these spaces. So they're less scared of you. So you should be advocating and talking to legislation and also going to protests and also participating in all of these beautiful resources. But absolutely. Like, white people need to be talking to other. Unfortunately, most of our representatives are still very white. So that is our job, is to go talk to other old white people that run our country.
Yeah. Spencer, you want to close us out?
Sure. I was just kind of thinking about what everyone said, and I agree completely. And I was kind of thinking about tying in like the idea of community with anti-racism. And it's like for me, we talked about it. Like, right, if someone gets called out on something and they're like, "Oh, my bad," like, "Oop, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna work better." That's what I want in my community because they're willing to make a change and make a difference and learn and grow. Versus if you're saying something and they're like, "Well, I don't feel like that was really that bad." Then it's like, okay, so I can give it to you once, I can give it to you a second time, but if you keep pushing back on it, then that means that you're probably not going to change, and I don't necessarily need you in my community. Or bringing my community and going, "Hey, what can we do to maybe help this person understand how to learn and grow?" And so that's something where I think it's like choose your community that's going to have your back and support you regardless. Like I want to be able to say, "Hey, my community, this thing," and everyone's like, "Great." I don't feel like I have to think about who I'm responding to or who I'm engaging in my community. I just have those people that I know and can trust.
This was a great panel. I am so stoked. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to support@hollywoodfringe.org. We're here for you. We'll see you at our next in-person event, which I think is in a couple of weeks. Go to hollywoodfringe.org/events. You'll find them.